Thanks everybody for coming. I know this is the last session of the day before Kube Crawl, so we're going to try to keep it on time, and super appreciate everybody coming by. Today we're going to talk about an API Gateway Maturity Matrix. My name is Joel Hans. I do a lot of DevRel things at ngrok, and I love stories, so I want to start with a story that I hope will unfortunately resonate with many of you. So it all starts with a little baby Kubernetes cluster. It's so cute and full of promise. Maybe there's some OG services, doesn't matter what the language is, Python looks nice up there. And maybe there's a marketing site as well that you get set up. You like to make yourself have harder problems than they should be, so you don't just use S3 and CloudFront. You want to do it all yourself. And then, oh, okay, I think there was supposed to be some services that pop in here. Let's go back through. Nope, that's not what it's supposed to do at all. Anyways, you have some Go services that come in at some point, and then you hire a marketing team, and they want to rip out a bunch of the existing website, and they want to host that on an external service, and so then you have to figure out, how do I host that on the /blog path? Do I use my cluster as a reverse proxy, or do I stand something else up? And then comes in another project to set up developer documentation. Again, you don't want to rip everything apart, so you got to figure out some more routing. And then you have some more Go services that just don't feel like showing up for me today. And then you need to move a couple APIs around. Maybe you need to deprecate one, V1 to V2, maybe some rewrites, redirects, everything like that. And all of a sudden, everything becomes a moving target. They finally worked. And trying to take back control of all of this, trying to make it feel better, work better, it often seems insurmountable. And if you are a CTO or you are an engineering leader, you don't want to be in this position. If you're a platform engineer, your golden path doesn't feel so much golden as it does, covered with a rock slide. And if you are an infrastructure or DevOps engineer, you're that this is fine dog meme until you decide to hang up your hat and move into something else. And this is a story of people who don't have a way to self-assess where they stand with their API gateway and take a single step away from this chaos and having something that's more well-managed, secure, developer-friendly, and more mature, right? A good API gateway, that front door into all your services that you offload a bunch of non-functional requirements to, like authentication, it shouldn't have to make these problems hard. The hard part is knowing which of the many features these API gateways offer you should actually turn on. Which is going to provide you the highest ROI right now based on the problems you're facing. So whether you've found yourself in this story before, or you've picked out an API gateway and you're super excited to turn on all the features only to find out that you have been dragged into some kind of chaos like this, the whole point of what I'm trying to do here today is say that there can and should be a way for you to help yourself find what that next big thing is, even if that means not turning on some of those features that you were so very excited about to begin with. So is this matrix right for you? In that story, I mentioned a couple of personas, which I've reflected here as well. So obviously, if you are using an API gateway and you are a consumer and you fit one of these personas, the answer is, I hope so. And I want you to walk away from today feeling inspired by this idea that you can self-assess the status of your API gateway based on some capability threads and dimensions, and that you know where you can maybe find the next best ROI for your platform. If you are a builder of an API gateway, and there might be a few of you out there, I would like this to also reflect in that you could use this to think about your user journey and the ergonomics around helping your customers set up certain features of the API gateway. How can you use your product to lead them into better things without adding complexity? And either way, whether you are one of these personas, you're a consumer, you're a builder, I'd love for this to start up a bigger conversation around contribution to this idea. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. So why should you care? I mean, API gateways are just the front door to your platform and your business. It's just like the path of ingress to everything. So it's pretty important. But what I'm going to say now, and I'm going to repeat it a couple times, is that you don't need to be at the top of the maturity mountain for everything. The end goal here isn't to say you need to have turned on all the features, you need to be maximally invested in your API gateway. It's about evaluating the landscape of capabilities ahead of you and comparing that to what your company actually needs right now, and knowing whether you need to solve problem A tomorrow because you need to prioritize problem Z today. So in terms of what I want you to take away from today's talk is that I want you to understand and feel inspired, feel the value of doing a self-assessment of your API gateway as one piece of technology within your larger platform, and a way for you to explore what you could do next and lean on your team to help you identify the right time and place to do so. And again, I would hope that it means that people are interested in contributing to make this thing better, because it's not a means of judging your implementation or saying you're doing things wrong. I'm not the person to be doing that, but I think that what I would like is that maybe there's a community that gets grown up around this idea, and we can discover some of these things together. So you might think that I care because I work for ngrok and we're building an API gateway, and our infrastructure engineers are dog fooding an API gateway. But the story started a couple years ago for me. I was in Detroit sitting with a couple of CTOs and tech leaders from CNCF's end user community. And they were, if you don't know anything about me, you might think oh, maybe I was there to contribute to the conversation, right? No, I was there to take notes and listen to what they said, and being a writer, turn that into a report for CNCF about how these folks thought about CNCF's cloud native maturity model. So if you're not familiar with that, we'll take another step back. This is a model started a couple years ago based on these 5 levels of build, operate, scale, improve, and adapt. And they have 4 dimensions. Build is kind of you have a baseline implementation. Operate is that you've moved into production. Scale, you're playing around with automation, GitOps, CI/CD. Improve is that you're defining security and policy and governance across your environment. And adapt being that you are kind of future-proofing your cloud-native implementation and revisiting earlier decisions to make it better. So what I wanted to do was build off of that idea. Back in Detroit, these leaders, they loved having this roadmap for how to implement cloud-native technology, but it's also kind of a bigger picture. It's about the culture of cloud-native. It's about things that are not specific technologies. And that was where I started to think, could we have a similar thing that's focused just on the tactics and capabilities and requirements that an API gateway is supposed to give us? So if the CNCF model gives us the forest, I would like to focus on one specific tree within it. The idea of maturity, I think probably a lot of you in the audience have your own definition of what that means. It's maybe not a great thing in your minds. So it's not about how old a product is or how long you've been using it. It's not about whether you've written things down or not, or how many features you've been using. I'd like to think about maturity as your journey of adoption, whether these things are, the things that you have built are flexible enough to deal with new problems as you face them. And again, how good those ergonomics are as you turn things on. And I think it can be a really, maturity can be a conscious effort to get you a lot of really good things if you, again, have that path to be able to explore it. In terms of how I've been defining maturity for the sake of building out this matrix, this model, is that as adoption of an API gateway matures, engineers are shifting away from building API gateways for themselves to solve their own problems, and they want to turn that toward enabling others without giving up that control that they need, because it is that front door and because it's so critical. So I was gonna do some sort of fancy Slido interactive polling to see where people think they stand on this, but I wanted to do something a bit more human. And I wonder if people are willing to raise their hands based on, are you sitting here thinking, I think there's something in front of my APIs, but I don't really know if there's what that is? No, nobody? Everyone's feeling, oh, I see one back there, lovely. Building on the API gateway involves lots of tickets and praying someone still remembers how it all works. Anybody feel like that resonates with them? You got a couple. And who's here is feeling really confident that like, I'm just here because I know I'm rock solid and want to see where everyone else is struggling? Nobody seems to be that confident either. That's good. We like some modesty. So onto the matrix itself. As you can see here, I've built upon the 5 levels of that the cloud native maturity model had started with, but I'm taking an API gateway specific lens on that. So in build, again, you're in pre-production, maybe you have some sort of basic ingress, a reverse proxy, maybe you're using both. You know, a lot of things are manually configured. There's a sort of mix and match situation happening here. When you move into operate, you're trying to patch some of those holes. You're trying to make sure that when new services are deployed, that happens on the API gateway or behind the API gateway as opposed to letting people choose their own path. As you get into scale, obviously you want to make this thing bigger. You want to make it operate really smoothly, but you don't want to deal with all the foot guns that often come with that. As you get into improve, like everything becomes important. Things that you thought weren't important before, like you need to figure them out right now because you're operating at a scale that maybe surprises you. And finally, in adapt is this question of how do we keep innovating without over-engineering? How do you get to that kind of bad connotation of maturity that so many people are afraid of, something being crusty, something being laden with technical debt? How do you adapt to new problems but not get to that kind of difficult phase of being able to break free? So from here, my model turns into these 5 dimensions. And what I had shown before about CNCF's model is that they have dimensions like people and technology and business outcomes. I think what I wanted to do here was because an API gateway is a piece of technology, it's a part of a much bigger equation. I didn't want to try to tie an API gateway to broader cultural improvements. I think it's more important to keep it focused on like what are the things that it can provide you on a technical level. So we're going to run through these 5 things through each of the 5 levels, and you can see how this certain capability evolves over time. So let's jump into traffic management. Now I'm going to apologize. Actually, the text is bigger than I thought it was going to be, but I'm going to apologize once for the amount of text on these slides. It turns out that making a maturity model involves a lot of writing of things, and reflecting that in the slides is a little tricky. I'm also going to share with you later on how you can get access to all this information on a GitHub repository, so you don't feel like you necessarily have to like take pictures of each slide. But in terms of this slide, at the very beginning, you might, as I said before, you might not even have an API gateway, or you might be, using that mix and match of reverse proxy, API gateway, or even like port forwarding to get certain things online and exposed to the internet. Whatever your method, everything starts static, and then as you progress through these levels, everything becomes more dynamic, more about enabling developers to be able to ship under your API gateway, and then into adapt, you start getting to some very fancy things that I think we would all love to have, but feel like they are so far away from our reality. And I wanted to show off what this might look like at a sort of Acme Corp, like not a real thing, but I think illustrations help a lot. And my daughters helped me; they love Pokemon, and so they helped me pick out this radar as a way to show off the growth of certain dimensions. So you can see here that this 2-person thing is like 2 technical co-founders. They're just shipping code. They're not concerned about, complex CI/CD. It's just easier for them to work in tight collaboration. But you can see that a pretty common pattern that, myself and people that I've talked to about this have recognized is that it's pretty common to go deep on something like traffic management, and maybe authentication as well, before you spend any time worrying about something like developer experience or especially governance, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Authentication and security. again, like one of the things that I wanted to point out about this before I talk about like this specific growth of capability is that I have a generalized statement about the value that an API gateway might be providing at a certain level, and then some examples of what those might be. You might find that you are implementing a certain example capability, like maybe you do geo-blocking because your API gateway makes that super easy for you, but you're not using something on the operate level. So you kind of have this mix and match of capabilities. So I'd say in terms of you doing a self-assessment, I would always say to go back to that generalized statement and say like, am I solving this problem in this way? Am I creating value in a certain way? And that's helpful to help you map where you might be in the greater landscape. For authentication specifically, your journey starts with a lot of essential auth services being, or authentication methods being embedded directly into your services, which equates to a lot of inconsistency, a lot of like worrying about security issues and trying to maintain all of them, and being that sort of platform engineering, infrastructure engineering role, that's a lot of extra burden on you. As you mature, you are increasingly using the API gateway as this kind of single place for centralized management, maybe of zero trust fundamentals. Love throwing some buzzwords in there, so that you can protect your APIs no matter who's building them or who is deploying them, whether that's a developer doing self-service or that's an infrastructure team doing that for them. And when you standardize the security on your API gateway and everybody's pushing their services behind that, you end up becoming not a bottleneck, but an accelerator for the folks, for the developer folks who need to work quickly and not get blocked. Into observability and debugging. In this case, I would say the API gateway really starts as a data source, but quickly becomes the go-to place for debugging actions, right? Like if all external services or all external requests are coming in through the API gateway, then it makes a lot of sense to look to the API gateway when things go wrong. As you get into the operate and scale levels, you also start seeing the API gateway become a central monitoring point for KPIs like response times and usage patterns. And so like the value of the API gateway increases as you add new capabilities to the function that you already have running. And as you get into the improve and adapt phases, observability becomes a really great place as maybe an emerging platform team to make this feature-rich golden path, which I'll talk about in a slide or two from now. So if you give them more metrics, better dashboards, better error handling, and it's all built into the API gateway, they'll be a lot more likely to want to jump into that as opposed to wanting to stick to their way of doing things and maybe their monoliths that they've been maintaining for years. And this is where AI maybe rears its ugly head for the first time. AI-driven anomaly detection and automated RCA. I think there's a big question here, and I would love, again, as I start to talk about contribution to this model, how folks like you in the audience think about AI as playing a role in the future of platforms and API gateways and ingress. So let's take a look back at Acme Corp. Now that they have become a 50-person startup, they've grown a lot, and their radar has expanded in a couple of interesting ways. They've gone past level 1 for observability. They're into level 2, which means they are like past basic logs. Maybe they moved into structured logs to be able to handle some issues that they've met along the way. They're thinking about automation and infrastructure as code for deployments, which gives maybe a nice little boost to the developer experience or their experience as infrastructure engineers. They've matured a little bit, in different directions, but as you can see, they're facing a couple of interesting problems. Like they have, they're getting late responses or error rates, and they're still trying to figure out what's going on with those. So you can probably guess that they might want to mature a little bit more in observability as they move forward. Another thing that's important to mention here is that in this scenario, I'm imagining that there's more than one team using an API gateway at this point. Like when they were a 2-person startup, you have two people, 1 team shipping behind the API gateway. As you expand outward and you have 5 teams, 10 teams, I've talked to colleagues that, one colleague had worked at a place where there's 80 teams shipping behind the API gateway. The value of going up in maturity becomes that much more important as you scale up the number of teams that are deploying behind it, because you have it as that centralized control point where everyone maybe gets their own path on api.yourcompany.com, and that centralized control point just kind of the value of that accelerates. Moving into developer and team experience. At the beginning, the lack of an API gateway or a very underutilized one eventually transforms into this repeatable process for ingress, or repeatable pattern that might not create an improvement right away in the developer experience, but I think that adding to this platform, trying to standardize things, that has a ton of downstream effects that play a big role later as you start to get to scale and improve, where you're really trying to onboard internal developers onto this system that you've built. You're always trying to strike a balance between offering an easy button so that developers can just make it as easy as possible, but also supporting the power users who want you to support that one strange thing that they do, or trying to deal with them and navigate the best way to go forward. Everyone's service to them feels like a special snowflake, and so it's very important in terms of the API gateway to support them where they are. Finally, into governance and compliance. I think compliance, and this one is a tricky one because it reaches into all the other areas. And second, you might get really big before compliance and governance is a problem for you. You don't really need it until your customers or your partners come knocking at your door and tell you you need to turn these things on if you want us to work with you. And then it's, again, kind of that all the things all the time scenario that you have to deal with. And as you're trying to get better at these things, you're facing a lot of pendulum swings between your team, your infrastructure team, and developers who want to ship fast. One day they'll say, we need API versioning right now. And the next day they'll say, never mind, we figured it out ourselves. So, what your job here in terms of maturing the API gateway as you get to scale and onward is that you've codified all of these things in a way that despite some conflicts here and there, you've got your team, when they're ready to onboard, you are ready to support them in the best way that you can. And this part is all about what are those last steps that you can take to enable other people in your organization in a way that doesn't lead your API gateway into a place of utter chaos. So we've got our Acme Corp, now that they are a 200 developer machine, which means they are a much bigger organization overall. And I kind of hate the shape of this just aesthetically, but I think it shows how the adoption of features and maturity with the API gateway can change over time because your requirements are changing. So you can see that I mentioned before when they were a 50-person company, they were dealing with observability challenges. And now you can see they've gone quite deep on solving observability. In my scenario, they've also acquired another company in a scary, different regulatory environment, which means they had to go, I think, basically from level 1 or level 2 all the way to level 4 in governance and compliance. It's that idea of responding as things happen and finding that next best ROI thing that you can turn on with your API gateway. And because their platform has matured in a lot of different ways, it's okay that they're not level 5 in all the things. In fact, they're at a point where they have rationalized that maybe they will never need to reach level 5 in observability because it's not something that they are actively dealing with. And again, that is the whole point, or one of the main points of this, of what I'm trying to build here is, it's okay to not have turned everything on, and it's okay to, and we should be taking a more measured look at how to approach these complex problems. So I wanted to kind of come back to that we've gone through the matrix and see if people's opinions have changed at all. Is there anyone who is like, since going through this, is like, I know less about my API gateway than I did at the beginning, or is still feeling not particularly confident in how they've set things up? Who's like feeling like, okay, we're maturing, but we don't, like we're still figuring out how to scale and how to build this thing up and improve it. Got a couple. People seem to be in the middle ground. And who's feeling like maybe more confident than they were at the beginning, that like, yeah, we've turned on a lot of these things, we've got a rational plan for moving forward. A couple in the back as well. Awesome. So I know I gave you a ton of information, but the good news is that everything that I showed you here, plus some additional things, is available on GitHub. You can find that repository that way. You can scan the QR code, however you'd like to find it. What I would like for you to walk away with today, we've got just a couple minutes, is maybe not today. I understand we have a kubecrawl right after this, so you might not want to do this right away, but take a few minutes to go to that repository, take a look at that, see where you stand. Like, where are you strong? Where do you wish you could do more in terms of the capabilities of your API gateway? Maybe next week, once you've all returned home to the office, to your home office, I would love if some of you took the model back to your team, have a conversation about it, explore each thread, each level, and have a good conversation about the problems you're solving, the value you're creating, and maybe places you're held back, whether that's a lack of resources, you don't have the business case, maybe your API gateway doesn't have the capability you're looking for. And in terms of contribution, that GitHub repository is open source, it's MIT licensed. I would love to have other people jump into that conversation and see how we could collectively make it better. Maybe you want to help me replace those Acme Corp illustrations with a self-assessment you've done about your own organization. Let's run the data or run this algorithm against some real world data to see what that looks like. Maybe you were looking through each of the levels, you saw those example capabilities, and you thought, like, I have something that I've turned on with my API gateway that feels like it's a really good fit there that's missing. I would love to hear that. Maybe we could build like a Myers-Briggs-esque questionnaire that asks folks a couple of questions and then spits out what a best estimate of their API gateway maturity and where they could head next. And maybe somebody out there is really good with governance or kind of like control of open source projects and getting community involvement. I would love to have a conversation around that and continue to make this thing better. So my hope for the talk, for sharing all this with you and trying to build this thing out, is that that you want to contribute, that you want to have these conversations with your team, and that we can all take a step forward in terms of our own maturity as people who think about, architect, build, implement, debug, observe, and yes, even for folks like me who stand up on stage and talk about it, mature in our understanding of these beloved and maybe finicky API gateways. So that is it for me today. Any questions that we've got just a few minutes maybe before I let you all go to KubeCon. Would love to hear if anybody has any questions. And this is a QR code for my, to give feedback. This is the first talk I've ever put together in a context like this. So I would love your open and honest feedback about how I could make future talks better. That would be enormously helpful. And there's a couple other ways to get in touch with me. I've headed back to the ngrok booth right now. If you'd like to continue the conversation, I would love to do that. So thanks for coming, everyone. I'll see you out at KubeCrawl, and stay safe. Happy travels.